God bless you. Sit down quick. Oh, man. Bless you. Bless you. Now, I know you're all wondering, why am I wearing green pants? These are the pants that I wore in a film that I call 2,000 Mules. Oh, yeah. Have you seen that film? Hey. We can't talk about the election fraud. They could shut this down right now. We're in America, and we get to talk about anything we want. We are free in America to talk about anything we want. You don't even have to be right. It doesn't matter if you're right. You just have the freedom, you know? So if you say, well, I want to talk about sexuality, I believe sex is between a man and a woman married for life, blah, 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 blah. And people say, well, that's crazy. Well, you know, it might be crazy, but I believe it. And you can't tell me what I can talk about. Well, I'm here to tell you that we're living in a country that has forgotten what liberty is. We have forgotten that people have literally died so we can say whatever we feel like saying. We have liberty in this country, and it is a sacred thing, and most people around the world do not have it. And if we don't protect it and understand what a gift it is, let me tell you something, folks. It is shameful if you have an amazing gift and you just have no idea what it is. Now, I've given many talks on that. I wrote a book called If You Can Keep It, about the link between faith and virtue and freedom. And I'm here to tell you, I never understood that growing up. And part of the reason I wrote the book, the new book, is because when you don't understand the link between faith and freedom, you can often have a false idea of faith, not just a false idea of freedom or a cavalier attitude about freedom. I want to tell you, first of all, Os Guinness, some of you know Os Guinness, he wrote a book, I remember reading the book, this is not many years ago, where he talks about something called the Golden Triangle of Freedom. And I write about it. I was so excited about this that I said, I have to write a book where I make this the centerpiece, because most people are not aware of this. And I want to say this just to frame my remarks. The Golden Triangle of Freedom in a nutshell. Some of you understand this. If you're homeschooled, I'm sure you could teach me about this, right? But in public schools, they're not teaching this. They haven't been teaching this idea. It's the idea that freedom, liberty, the ability to govern ourselves requires virtue. There's no way around it. It's like math. There's no other way for people to govern themselves and to be free unless they have virtue, right? It's not about liberty meaning license. It's freedom to do the right thing, freedom to govern myself and not be governed from above by a tyrant or by a bureaucracy or a deep state or by anyone. To be governed, I will govern myself. We will govern ourselves. Well, the way you do it is with virtue. And all the founders understood that a virtuous people will govern themselves. We don't need to worry so much about them. We don't need to hire, like pulling a number out of a hat, 87,000 IRS agents, for example. We don't need to do that because people won't cheat on taxes and they won't lie. They are virtuous people, and we don't need a gigantic government to police them. And the founders understood that liberty requires virtue, but virtue in turn requires faith. Why would you be virtuous? Why? I mean, if somebody's not holding a gun to your head to do the right thing, why do you do the right thing? Well, usually it's because you fear God, because you listen to a higher authority. You say, I don't need a cop to tell me not to steal. I learned that stealing is a sin, that God, who died for me and loves me, doesn't want me to steal. That's why I don't steal. It's kind of basic, right? So the founders all understood that freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. But here's the key. Faith, in turn, requires freedom. In other words, the faith that we have to love God and to worship God in our own way, you can't do that without freedom. There are many places in this world where you can't have the kind of faith that we have. They say, no. Here, everyone is a Muslim. Here, everyone is an atheist. Or in Connecticut, here, everyone is a Congregationalist. That was a joke. It's okay. It's okay. I know it's late. I'll wrap it up. But the point is, the idea that you can believe whatever you like, or believe nothing, or worship when you like, how you like. Religious liberty is a beautiful thing, and it enables us to have true faith, that it's not coerced by the government. Because if the government tells you how to believe or what to believe, you know that whatever you do, your heart is not in it, right? If the government decrees everyone here is a Catholic, everyone here is a Lutheran, if the government decrees it, you just do it because you're being told to do it. But real faith, the kind of faith that produces people of virtue, that faith has to arise freely. So the founders understood this. So most people, when they want to divorce the concept of faith or religion from, let's say, politics, you want to say to them, I don't think you understand. You cannot have real faith unless you have a political system that allows you to have real faith, whether you govern yourself. If you slide into Marxist tyranny, they're not going to allow you to practice your faith and to have faith. So on the most fundamental level, Americans have always understood that to say that I have to keep politics out of my faith is nonsensical. It's like saying, I got to keep math out of my physics. Why? What are you talking about? Why would you say a thing like that? It doesn't really make sense. Now, if you want to tell me, don't make an idol of politics. Well, any idiot knows I shouldn't make an idol out of anything. Idols are bad. They're satanic. They replace God. We know that, right? And we all know we have temptation to idols, and we all know that. But when somebody says, well, the only way to do it is not to be political at all, you think, well, no, politics is something that God can use. I wrote a book called Amazing Grace about a man named William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce, because of his faith in Jesus, knew that slavery was wicked, but he lived in a culture that didn't know that. He lived in a culture that was not thoroughly Christian. They were Christian in name only. And he knew that God was calling him to use politics and everything else and the culture to end this satanic thing called the transatlantic slave trade. It was satanic. If you read in my book, Amazing Grace, the description of the middle passage, you can't believe that human beings would do this to other human beings. And you know that if you really know the God of the Bible, you would not countenance that. But so Wilberforce was not just political, he was a politician used by God to abolish this tremendously evil thing. So how is it that we get to today where you have a lot of Christians who say, we're not supposed to be political. From the pulpit, we don't do politics. Well, I get it. I get it. The pulpit is the pulpit. And so it's not principally to be used to do politics. But when you start arbitrarily saying, we don't do politics, if slavery is on the ballot in November, are you not going to do politics? If murdering the unborn is on the ballot in November, you're not going to do politics? Mr. Pastor, you're not going to talk about that from the pulpit? That's not a gospel-related issue, tearing arms and legs off of children in the womb. That's not a gospel-related issue. Bonhoeffer, in his day, was told the same thing. Some of you know the story about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor who grew up in Germany in an amazing family. And when he saw the Nazis rising to power, he had the discernment to recognize that they were evil, that they were fundamentally anti-Christian, right? Just because somebody says, I'm pro-God or I'm pro-Christian, we all understand that means absolutely nothing, right? How you live and what you stand for, we can find out eventually what you really stand for. But no politician is dumb enough to say, I'm against all that. You'll lose a lot of votes. So they give it, they give it a lot of quote unquote Catholic politicians who they're not Catholics, right? But they want the Catholic vote. So people like Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi say, "Oh, I'm Catholic. I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I will advocate for it." And you start thinking, well, look, folks, when you say you're a person of faith, God requires you to live out your faith in every sphere, fearlessly. You don't get to pick. It's either true or it's not. But we've been given this impression in the American church in a way that we don't do politics from the pulpit. Now, part of that, the reason I wrote this book, Letter to the American Church, is because we are now facing something so evil in this country. We know, I can go down the list, I won't, but you know that we're facing a host of evil things, and most pulpits are completely silent on these issues, okay? And I think, so why are you being silent? Because they've bought into this idea, which is madness, that, well, we can't talk about anything political. Faith is separate from politics. And again, you're talking about slavery, you're talking about the unborn, you're talking about the rise of the Nazis who want to demonize and murder the Jews. How do you avoid being political? If you're a Christian and you believe in good and evil and you see evil being done, can you keep your mouth shut? Really? What kind of a fake Christian are you if you can keep your mouth shut? So, but the fact of the matter is we're living in a time where many pulpits are silent, many Christians are silent. We even have Christians of some kind writing books saying that Christians should get out of politics, we should avoid politics. It's very divisive. It's very divisive. I'm just here to tell you, they're mistaken. They're profoundly mistaken. They're tragically mistaken. And really, the thesis of my book, Letter to the American Church, the basic thesis is that the silence of the German church in the 1930s on issues of politics, on issues of the Nazis, on whatever it was, the silence of the German church at that time led to the rise of one of the most vile episodes in history imaginable. In fact, most of us can barely imagine the satanic evil unleashed in Europe and the world as a result of the rise of the Nazis, but it was a direct result of the silence of the German church. Now, that is a fact. That is a fact, that it was the silence of the German church. But the thesis of my book, Letter to the American Church, is that it is the silence of the American church today on a host of similar issues that is leading us to precisely similar evils as the German church's silence led Germany to. Now, that to me is obvious, but it sounds like maybe it's hyperbole, right? So I want to be clear. What we're facing in America today, right now, is already a result of the silence of the church. I'm not saying the silence of the church today is going to lead to bad stuff. I'm saying the silence of the church over decades, the foolishness of pastors thinking that we can't be political, we can't talk about this or this or this or this, that foolishness has led to the evil we're seeing now. And what I'm saying is, if we continue to be silent and not to be engaged, not to be, as Christians, working our faith out in the public sphere. God commands us to do that. God commands us to do that, not simply to believe it in our heads. But if we continue to be silent on all of these issues and continue to say, well, we can't do politics, it will make the horrors you're seeing now in this country look like nothing. So in some ways, the book is an ominous, it has been described as an ominous warning. It is chilling. The parallel is chilling. But I say it because I believe the Lord genuinely called me to write this book. I don't say those things lightly. I believe the Lord wanted me to write this book for his purposes in this generation, to help explain to us why we must be engaged, why being any kind of a Christian means you must be engaged politically, culturally, in every way. And that just to say, I have faith, is meaningless. I really believe Lord called me to do that. And, when I'm talking to a group like this that already gets it, but the point is, we need to be bolstered in this, to know that this is the biblical path. This is not just some theory. This is scripturally what God calls us to do. And I want the book, it's the shortest book I've ever written, but I want it to arm you, because there are tons of people, friends who are Christians, who they've never heard this. They just have bought this cliche, this lie, that we're not supposed to be involved in politics. Somehow they've just bought that. And we need to help them to understand, no, not only is that wrong, but it is going to lead to evils that are unbelievable. Do you think the German church had any idea what their silence was leading to? I promise you they didn't. They were exactly like the American church today. They lived in an amazing country, a Christian country, a prosperous country, a tremendously educated, civilized, cultured nation. They never dreamt that it could go in that direction. But you and I know that it did. You and I know that the black mark that Germany has in the book of history, it's almost unlike any nation we can think of. But I'm here to say clearly, folks, it was because of the silence of the German church. I want to be very clear. God holds the church accountable. God deputized the church. It's only Christians that are supposed to be fearless, because we're supposed to believe Jesus actually defeated death on the cross. And so he has completely freed us. Now, we've got a lot of pseudo-Christians who don't really believe that. Maybe there's some of you that go, I hope it's true. Let me tell you something, folks. You're not supposed to hope that's true. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to know that's true, because, by the way, it is true. It's like saying, I hope 1 + 1 = 2. I hope the earth is a sphere. If somebody says, I hope the earth is a sphere, you'd say, you've got some problems, because you should know that. Christians, the simplest thing we should know, the simplest thing any Christian should know, is that Jesus destroyed death on the cross. That is not a metaphor, that's a reality. And if you know that and accept that by faith, you will never die. You will live eternally. You will go to be with him in paradise. In fact, if we are actually Christians, we should look forward to the day we leave this world. We are fools not to look forward. It's simply a lack of faith, frankly, that we wouldn't look forward to it. But what I'm saying is, if you have that kind of faith, it changes the way you live. You're not afraid to say the truth. You're not afraid what people will think. You're not afraid if they kill you. You say, well, God died so that I could be free, and he has deputized me. He's commanded me to speak the truth. He's commanded me to be a voice for the voiceless. This is not extra credit Christianity. This is called Christianity. But we've been so blessed in this nation that we haven't really had to live out our faith. We just say, well, yeah, I believe that stuff. I believe that stuff. But we haven't had to prove it. Listen, if you become a Christian in North Korea, you become a Christian in China, you become a Christian in the Muslim world, you're either going to actually believe it or you're not going to believe it. There's no like, well, I sort of believe it, because, you could sort of be beheaded. So you're going to think, do I know this is true? If you know it's true, then you say, do to me what you will, just as all of the saints through history have had that kind of faith, because they know you can't kill me. And I know you can't kill me, because Jesus defeated death on the cross. So this idea that we're supposed to be not political, it has led us to a strange place in America. It has led the church to be, in effect, passive and useless. And so as evil has risen, the church has said, well, I don't want to get into that. I might alienate a few people in my congregation. Well, folks, that makes no sense on any level. It's not biblical. But it's where we are right now in America. Now, the book is titled Letter to the American Church, but I actually was going to title it Faith Without Works is Dead. Because James writes that, and we kind of ignore that. We kind of forget that. When I wrote my book about Luther, you realize how Luther, he almost went crazy on the idea of faith, right? So much so, when you get an idea and that you become so obsessed with one idea that you lose your mind on everything else. That's all you can talk about. Have you ever met anybody like that? I want to show you pictures of my new grandchild. Look, it's okay. There are other people in the world. Please relax. Some people go crazy. Luther became so obsessed with the idea because he had been so destroyed, wounded by a church that was effectively preaching works, right? Do this, do this, do this, do this. Fast harder, pray harder, confess more, confess more. It was driving him crazy. So he finally finds that, the scripture says we're saved by faith. But he almost overstates it. What I mean is that, yes, you're saved by faith. But you cannot ignore that the scripture says faith without works is dead. What does that mean? It means that you're not saved by your works, but the point is, if you're saved by your faith is going to show up in the way you live your life. You're going to do things to God's glory. You're going to stop doing evil things. You're going to do good things. There's no way, if you believe the gospel, that you're not going to behave differently. If you don't behave differently, it's proof you don't believe the gospel. And as I say, because we live in America, we're very comfortable, we sort of forget that most Christians throughout history have had to pay a serious price for their faith. But we have this idea that, I just have to believe it. It's just an intellectual belief. What do you believe? Well, you go to my church's website, there's a statement of faith, that's what I believe. Or you go to the Nicene Creed, that's what I believe. Or the Bible, that's what I believe. Well, the question is, do you? Are you living your life so that your enemies and friends, when they look at your life, they say, he believes that. I know he believes that. Or are these just words? The reason I say these things is because the silence of the church in Germany was based on these bad ideas. In other words, and Bonhoeffer writes about this in his book, The Cost of Discipleship. They said, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to speak up against the Nazis. First of all, it's all about faith. It's just, I'm saved by what I believe. That's all that matters, right? Now, again, you realize there's nothing worse than a religious lie. There's nothing worse than a religious confusion or theological confusion. That you say to people all that matters is evangelism and whether you're saved. That's all that matters. And you say, okay, that's all that matters. So what I do to my neighbor, that doesn't matter. Whether I speak the truth when evil is being pronounced, that doesn't matter. Nothing matters except I'm saved, right? Of course, that's not true. You're over-focusing on the concept of faith, and you're forgetting that God wants you. You are a human being. You're not a disembodied brain, so that you say, I believe these things. Well, that's nice, but you're still here. You weren't translated to glory the moment you got saved. The Lord has work for you to do. He wants you to live out your faith, to bless others, to stand against evil, to be his army in this world, so that we do things like we feed the hungry, and we clothe the naked, and we stand against injustice, and we speak out against slavery and about killing children in the womb. We speak out against demonizing groups, whether it's the Tutsis or the Jews or any group. We stand against racism. That's who we are, and we're here to do those things. But I say this because to get to reiterate my point, there were many in the German church who said, no. The Nazis are rising, but it's not our role to speak against it. First of all, Romans 13, boom, that settles it. Well, Luther, in his own way, also had over-focused on Romans 13, or he had so spoken about Romans 13, I write about this in the book, that it almost became one of those blanket answers, one of those cliche answers, so that if you said to a serious Christian in Germany, as the Nazis are rising, that we better do something about this, said, no, Romans 13, it's kind of like veto. No, we can't do anything because Romans 13, chapter 1 says that the authorities are put in place by God, case closed. Well, if you read the rest of the Bible, you realize God has more to say on that issue. And you understand that it's a little more complicated. But there were voices in Germany saying, no, 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 we must not speak against the Nazis. That would be, we'd be going out of our lane. We are Christians. We don't do politics, right? Bonhoeffer was trying to get them to understand, folks, if we, the church, do not rise up en masse against this satanic evil of National Socialism, it's over. God has deputized us to do that. And by the way, in Germany, just like in America, the parallels are amazing. The German church had the power culturally. It was quite a Christian nation. If the German church had understood this and self-sacrificially risen up against the evil of the Nazis could not have prevailed. That's a fact. And Bonhoeffer knew that. But he was astonished and horrified at the passivity of the church, at their religiously based objections to doing anything. And it would be liberals and conservatives had their own reasons, right? We can see some of that in this country today, right? You can see some people that are, let's just say maybe the liberals would say, well, I'm not going to speak out against the government, or I'm not going to speak out against these wickedness things, because I sort of agree with some of these things. I don't even see any reason to speak out. I agree with some of the things that are going on. But some conservatives would say, I'm not going to speak out because I'm sort of too holy to get involved in anything dirty like politics. I'm not even going to vote for that guy because, he's been married more than once and he says some non-nice thing. I'm just going to sit on my hands and pray while the world goes to hell and the poor suffer and people in China are thrown into prison camps. And so it has nothing to do with me. I just don't want to get my hands dirty. We have a lot of people who have a kind of a pious faith that where they say, I'm just not called to be involved in the world. I'm just called to keep my nose clean. Well, the fact of the matter is, again, that's not the gospel. But we have this in America today where many people are saying, if you're speaking against the wickedness out in the world there, you're a mere culture warrior. You've made an idol of politics. You're not supposed to do that. So as I said, we have tons of pastors avoiding these issues. And I'm here to tell you, if you take away nothing else from what I'm saying, is that if the church in America remains silent on this host of issues that we all are aware of, God's judgment will fall on the church. And it is falling already on the church. Those churches that are speaking on these things are being blessed. Their numbers are exploding because people can't get enough of that guy sees what I'm going through. He said, I'm trying to raise my children in a world gone mad. I'm trying to raise my children in a world where they are daring to say insane things like men can become women and women become men. They're saying this, and then not only are they saying this, they're saying that you can't say anything against it. And I'm trying to work my job, trying to raise my kids, and I'm facing insanity everywhere I look. That's one example of insanity. Defund the police, another example of sheer lunacy. When I first heard it, I thought to myself, who could, what are you talking about? Are you saying remove corruption in the police force, make the police force better? Well, okay, I get it, but you're telling me defund the police? Well, wait, so you want the criminals to run the neighborhood? What do you want? What are you looking for? I could totally get behind defunding the FBI. Let me be clear about that. But when you hear people say these crazy things, or we're just going to, pay all your college debts. You say to all the people who already paid their college debts, sorry, you missed it. You were a sucker to pay your debts, because now we're gonna pay college debts. Folks, what this is, first of all, that's called socialism, right? Where the people are bribed by the government to keep your mouth shut, to do what you're told, and we'll give you some money, okay? That is the antithesis of the United States of America. That's the antithesis. So that's not just a political difference, right? I understand if Tip O'Neill was the leading Democrat. Anybody get that reference? Is the crowd too young? If you have those kinds of differences, that's one thing. But when you have people pushing Marxism, the cultural Marxism of critical race theory, and you don't speak against these things, folks, we in the church are commanded to love our neighbor, right? So if I care about my black neighbor and I do not speak against critical race theory and against Black Lives Matter, a corrupt Marxist organization, if I keep my mouth shut, it's obvious I don't love my black neighbor that much. Because I'm more afraid of being called racist or out of touch. I'm more concerned about myself than about the reality of the evil that is being promoted and that is going to crush black communities and is crushing black communities. And I'm not supposed to speak about that? What else am I not supposed to speak about? I'm not supposed to speak about the fact that many vaccines, that the vaccines were made because of abortions. That's a fact, very little reported on. So as a Christian, I'm supposed to take a vaccine that was made with an abortion. I have a moral problem with that. Can I bring that up? No, you can't even talk about vaccines. Now, when people start telling you what you can't talk about, you know something's wrong. In America, you don't tell me what I can and can't talk about, right? Because I'm going to remind you, people literally gave their lives so that we could be free and we could talk about anything we want. We could present our view, and if we disagree, that's fine. You don't have to agree with me that the election was stolen. You don't have to agree with me, but when you tell me I can't talk about it, my question is, why can't I talk about it? Why? Because it makes you uncomfortable to have a conversation, not because you disagree with me, but because you can't bear to have an actual conversation because you're afraid you might lose. And so, because you're not an American, because you don't behave like an American, because you're saying, we're not interested in dissent. We're not interested in your point of view. We are going to behave like atheist Marxists, and if you disagree with us, we're going to crush you. We're going to cancel you. Now, by the way, my radio program was wiped off of YouTube, which had a significant presence, right? Because I dared to have on a couple of guests that talked about things you're not supposed to talk about. They wiped out the program. Now, again, you don't have to agree with me politically or theologically, but you should be troubled if people are behaving that way. If people are trying to destroy dissent. You don't have to agree with me about the election. You don't have to agree with me about the vaccines. But the point is, when dissent is crushed, you know this is not the American way. This is not liberty. Now, my question is simply, how is it possible for the church to be silent about those things? How is it possible for the church to say, well, we don't want to lose, there may be people in our congregation, we're going to stay out of that one, right? Don't you think that there were many ministers, many pastors, they said, we're going to stay out of the slavery issue. We don't want to, we have a lot of people in congregation, they might get offended. They might own slaves, or they might be making millions of dollars off of slavery. We don't want to lose them. We want them to hear the gospel. What dead gospel are you preaching that you don't think you should speak about satanic evil? I was at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville. I don't know when it was, this year sometime. And a prominent radio preacher, right, whom I would otherwise respect, right, actually proudly in a meeting said, I didn't talk about any of those issues that could get me canceled because I want to be free to preach the gospel, right? And I just sat there, I felt like I was kicked in the teeth because I said to myself, well, I was canceled, and you're siding with the people who canceled me by saying, well, you should have kept your mouth shut, Eric. Don't talk about that stuff if you don't want to get canceled. Folks, it is as un-American and as un-Christian as anything to talk like that. But this was a prominent man of God. I won't mention his name, but I promise you, this is the view, that we're going to keep our nose clean. We're not going to bring those issues up. You don't want us to talk about that or that or that? That's fine. I just want to keep my ministry going so I can preach the gospel. And I want to ask you again, what dead pseudo-gospel are you preaching if you shut your mouth against these injustices? Where did you get the idea that we are only supposed to speak about the gospel? And what is the gospel? I'm only supposed to quote John 3:16 and everything else is off limits if the government tells me? What can I talk about? You realize, folks, they have this in China, okay? If you go to China, they say, oh, we've got the official churches right over there. You can go into that building on Sunday morning and you can do your freaky little superstitious, stupid rituals. And when you come out, you bow to the secular authority of the state, right? In America, we have a thing called freedom of religion, which means that when you leave the building on Sunday morning, you take the truth of God into every sphere in which you walk proudly and wonderfully, and you can't force it on people, but the Constitution says that you can exercise your faith anywhere and everywhere you go, and the founders knew that would be a good thing for freedom. So for pastors to participate in their own silencing tells you that the American church is exactly where the German church was, because I promise you folks, if you read the book, all of the examples are the same. The German pastor said, we're not supposed to do politics, we're just supposed to preach the gospel. Imagine letting millions of Jews go to their deaths in the death camps. And you say, well, that's not a gospel issue. Murdering women and children, it's not a gospel issue. I just want to preach the gospel. It's all about souls. Do you understand the sophistry and the deception involved in that? Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew says, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. You're obsessed with bringing people to the faith, and whatever faith you bring them to is not the faith of my Father in heaven. You give lip service to faith. Jesus earlier in Matthew says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. Now, why would we think that what Jesus saw in the people of God of his day would not exist among the people of God in our day? Why would we think that that kind of hypocrisy, that's what it is, it's hypocrisy. It's giving lip service to God. It's going on and on about God, and you're far from him in your heart. I want to tell you folks, it'd be better that you shut up about God than that you would dare talk about him and not live out what he commands you to live out and say the things that he commands you to live out. A lot of people have made an idol of evangelism. What I'm talking about is that they've basically said, that's all that matters, and I won't talk about anything that might be divisive. So I won't talk about any of these things, but you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. Neither Jesus nor all of the heroes in Scripture did that. You think you're being holier than them by just preaching the gospel. We now have this new term, it's like gospel-related issues, right? Is it a gospel-related issue? Folks, truth is a gospel-related issue. There's no way around it. Jesus said, I am the truth. So when you keep your mouth shut, when you see lies being promoted, and you see evil being promoted, and you keep your mouth shut, do you think God will not judge you? And in fact, if you claim to be a Christian and are talking about Jesus and you're keeping your mouth shut about all these things that concern the people for whom he died, he is not blessed by whatever it is that you think you're preaching. You have an obligation. You have an obligation to the poor. You have an obligation to everyone in this world. We have an obligation as a church to speak the truth, just as those in Bonhoeffer's day did, and just as those in Wilberforce's day did. And the church was silent. So when I think of this, a lot of people ask me, well, what about Tim Keller, right? Now, I love Tim Keller. He was a wonderful pastor. He wrote a lot of wonderful books. But he came up with this idea, and this idea made good sense for a time. The idea was that, you know, this conservative idea would be this, kind of like a legalistic idea of rules is this, And then the liberal idea is I can do whatever I want. There are no rules. That's this. But the gospel is this. It's a wonderful concept. But when you have the liberals no longer being represented by whoever was representing that party. Now, don't get me wrong, right? When I say talk about politics, I'm not a fan of most Republicans, okay? Most of them, and I'm lucky it's Cruz's father that's here, not Cornyn's father. I can say things like that. I'm not from Texas. But my point is that we know that there are many in the Republican Party that are keeping their mouths shut. They don't want to talk about any of that stuff. They just want to get along. So you have to say, well, okay, in 1985, maybe that wasn't the worst thing in the world, in 1995. But in this day and age, we are having transgender madness being pushed. Young women's lives are being destroyed forever. And the church is being silent. The church is being silent. We can talk about politics, but the point is the church is supposed to be the conscience of the state. Bonhoeffer said the church is the conscience of the state. And I want to close with this. I have to tell you, in Germany, in 1935, when Hitler was rising, okay, a number of heroic pastors wrote something called the Barmen Declaration, where they made very clear that the state run by Adolf Hitler does not have authority over the Church of Jesus Christ. They never really had to do that before, because the Kaiser was a Christian, and they didn't need the separation of church and state in that way. But when Hitler becomes the head of state, now if you don't have separation of church and state, you might have some problems. So they write this document. By 1935, the Nazis had so persecuted the church in Germany that of the 18,000 Protestant pastors, only 3,000 were standing firm with the Barmen Declaration. 3,000 were standing firm. On the other end of the spectrum, there were about 3,000 super pro-Nazis that couldn't care less about the gospel and the Bible, and they just, it's sort of like Episcopalians today. Or something like that. You can fill in the blank, but they're hanging the flags outside their churches. They're just like, hey, whatever. Okay, so there were 3,000 of those, and there were 3,000 heroes. But what is astonishing to me is that of those 18,000 pastors, there were 12,000 in the middle who said, we're going to sit this one out. We don't want to be political. We'll be quiet. We want to see which way the wind blows, because we don't want to get canceled. We don't want to get our church shut down. We're going to be quiet. We're going to let those suckers fight it out, the 3,000 heroes. We don't want to be heroes. We just want to get along. We just want to keep the church doors open and, keep the tithes coming, and we just want to preach the gospel. Well, I'm here to tell you it's because of the silence of those 12,000 that the 3,000 were crushed. It's because of the silence of the 12,000 that Germany was destroyed, that millions of Jews and others were murdered, because the 12,000 thought, we're going to play it safe. We're not going to be political. We understand that they were playing a game with God. They were covering themselves up with fig leaves, thinking they were going to fool God by we're going to play it safe, in the parable of the talents, the man who buries the talent. He says, I'm going to play it safe. I don't want to. My master is really unpleasant. I'm just going to bury the talent. When he comes back, I'll just give him what he gave me. That man in the parable is condemned for taking that safe path. God doesn't call us, to jump through some hoops and to stay out of trouble and don't lie. He calls us to love him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. He calls us to an abandoned faith that fears nothing. We're not supposed to avoid sin. That's part of it, but we're supposed to obediently serve God. And Bonhoeffer I write about it in the book, but the idea of a religious Christian who's playing it safe, if the Gestapo would come to the door in Germany and say, are you hiding a Jew in the basement? He would say, well, I don't want to lie. I could get in trouble with God. I'm not supposed to lie. So let me just say to the Gestapo man, yes, I'm hiding a Jew in the basement. Come and kill and torture the Jew, and I'm justified before God. That's the most pharisaical, wicked view imaginable. But if you as a pastor, as a Christian, your job is, I just want to stay out of trouble. You're serving the devil. You're not just not serving God, you're serving the devil. God asks us to choose. He demands that we choose. And even when we refuse to choose and say, well, I'll just take the safe middle path, as far as he's concerned, we have chosen. We don't fool him. Someone said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. God has made his people free so that we can live out our faith in every sphere. And if we as the church in America are silent, as the church in Germany was silent, at some point we lose the ability to do anything. And I am here to tell you that it is my judgment that we are on the very verge of losing everything because of the silence of Christian leaders. So people say, what can I do? What can I do? Well, I'm here to tell you everyone can do something. We're not all supposed to do the same thing. But the point is that you have been bought with a price. Jesus died a torture death on a Roman cross for you. You're supposed to live your whole life in gratitude to him for what he did. In joy and gratitude. So there are a million ways that you can serve the Lord. But if you don't care about that, if you have what Bonhoeffer called cheap grace, you go, well, it's not that important. My job is just to stay out of trouble. Evil wins. And again, I wrote the book because I'm convinced that the Lord is looking to his church now, to a holy remnant, to wake up and to engage and to do everything we possibly can do now. If you lose your job, can I promise you that God knows where to get you another job? And can I promise you that the God I worship knows that even if you don't get another job, he'll bless you in other ways. If you trust God with everything, you're living the way you're supposed to live. If you're a pastor trusting God with the numbers in your congregation, that's how you're supposed to live. If you lose some people because you said something, you're just supposed to trust, what does the Lord want me to say? And even if I go to the gallows, as Bonhoeffer went to the gallows, you've got a little trump card, a little secret knowledge that, by the way, Jesus defeated death. You can't even kill me. Folks, God is calling us to live that way. He's calling us to actually live out our faith. I believe he's allowed these horrible things to happen to bless us, to wake up those who could be awakened. And also, when the church arises and begins speaking against these innumerable evils, and you know what they are, everything you're not supposed to talk about or mention, if you begin speaking lovingly the truth about sexuality and about gender and about corruption in government, about everything, people will flock to your churches. There's the irony. People are so hungry for that, it's going to lead to revival, folks. Do you understand? Think of the irony. People are worried if I bring that up, I'll lose people. The reality is, if you dare to fearlessly speak the truth of God on all these issues and don't buy the lie that you should avoid politics, you should avoid nothing. You should avoid avoiding politics. You should speak the truth on every issue because Americans are hungry for the truth. They see lies everywhere. If you will do that, atheists and agnostics and lapsed Christians will flock to your churches and say, thank you, I didn't know churches like this existed. I'm on New York time, so I'm even more tired than you are. But I want to tell you, the reason I wrote this book is because I believe the Lord has his hand on this nation. He's allowed these things to happen to wake up those Christians who can still be awakened and to draw those to himself who are not yet Christians, who are looking around and saying, things are going crazy. Is anybody noticing? Is there anybody brave enough to speak about this? Are there any pastors speaking about this? Because I would go back to church for that. The opportunity we have as the body of Christ in America is astonishing. And I want you to believe me, with me, that God does not want to lose this nation, because this nation not only has been a bulwark of freedom for the whole world, but has been a fountain of the gospel and of teaching the gospel around the world. The enemy wants to crush that. He will do it by silencing the churches. We must not be silent. God bless you. Thank you.